Rita.
Okay, Alan Burko, alternate,
Bill Spence, member.
John Racine, member.
Morgan Dean, member.
Rob Wilson, alternate.
Okay. So I'm going to seat Margaret. Which
Margaret is seated.
seated, I'm gonna seat Alan. And can I seat,
Mhm.
Rob Wilson, I'm gonna seat you as well, okay?
Okay.
All right. We got that out of the way. Let's take a look at some of the minutes. Starting with September 12. Mr. Secretary, you got an idea? Anything you?
No, I've already conferred.
So I sent out a draft update yesterday.
We
that
did the draft.
I had Nancy listed as absent somehow, so I fixed that.
Okay, yep, we saw that. Yep.
So
Kathy, anything? Morgan?
No, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on this? Mr. Secretary?
Okay, I move that the minutes be accepted as presented.
For September 12?
We read the minutes of September 12.
Okay. Anybody want
second.
to? All in favor for that?
Okay,
Okay, let's go to September 26th for the minutes. Take a quick look at that. That was a special meeting we
Yeah.
had for the RFQ. That seemed to look pretty good.
yeah, no,
You want to do with that?
okay, I move that we accept these minutes as presented for September 26.
Okay, anybody want to second that?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. We got that. Out of the way. I usually put privilege of the floor first, but if you wanna, I see some folks here, if you wanna get into this a little bit further and then I'll talk to you, or do you have something you'd like to say something now? Charles, I know you're here for the Conservation Commission. Did you get my email, by the way?
I did.
Okay,
I was curious. I understand that Tara was gonna be making available some maps and information, and I wasn't able to access that, of course. Is that
okay.
available to the.
Well, we'll talk to her a little later. She's coming on a little later. She'll be here on board about 8:45, so,
And Paul will be here shortly, I believe.
okay. Oh, okay. He's coming, okay.
I just have a quick one, John.
Okay, sure. Just for our folks in the audience, just.
Daryl Fernandez, Flat Mountain Road. So as we've been kind of talking to different people about different proposals that have been coming through. And I know you've got some special guests coming up. One of the things that has been discussed amongst some of us non-board members. Is the parking situation and the proposal that's on the table today, or that we've seen been shared. And the question has been kind of floating, is there something the planning board could do to put different incentives in place to make that parking structure or parking in the core a little more aesthetically pleasing, such as a certain percentage of parking must be below grade, things like that. So I don't know exactly how you would frame something like that. Tara's not here, so I don't know logistically how you could even approach something like that. But I think many of us in town want to make sure we preserve the aesthetic of the town.
Yep.
And don't believe that a parking structure above ground with no other solutions, while it may be the most cost effective, is the most consistent with the aesthetic of the town as it's been. So I just put that out as something
Okay.
to be considered by the board.
Yep, we are working on that. We have James here today to talk about that a little later. Different other things as well, but. And it's just conceptual right now, his plan, so. We'll talk about it and continue to talk about it as well.
Yeah,
Thank you, Daryl.
I'm not at the mic anymore, but I'll talk loudly.
Yeah.
I think this is the time to go beyond conceptual for the board to put what we believe is appropriate for the town in place.
Yep.
And not wait for something to be beyond conceptual and then respond when it's too late.
Yep. I hear you loud and clear. Let's go right into the RFQ update. We'll talk about a little bit about that. Is Steve here?
What do you have?
Well, we had a subcommittee in regards to the RFQ. Did you guys meet?
Member-
Yes, we did. We met twice. And essentially what has happened is that the RFQ was approved at the last board meeting, and the RFQ was sent to a broad number of applicants. We're waiting for applicants to provide their response. Have we received any, Mark?
We had 2 inquiries. No, they haven't submitted anything yet. But we expect at least 2 responses.
We sent out, I think we approved
We had 8,
8, yeah.
so we had 8 targeted
Okay,
distributions, so we personal contacts via email to 8 firms. And then we did a general announcement for the RFQ on the municipal association site. And reached out through the state Office of State Planning. So.
Bill, just for purpose of understanding what this is for the camera, could you explain what the RFQ means?
It's a request for qualifications. And the qualification statement, I don't have it in front of me, but what it did was ask for resumes of the principals, their work history, their qualifications to satisfy the needs of Waterville Valley Planning Board, essentially, in regard to the demands that we would make on them to be present at meetings, to review our proposals with respect to state law, their experience in dealing with municipal affairs, construction, our existing ordinances, and to provide advice with regard to the questions that are going to come before the board in the future.
And this has all come about because our planner is
Retiring.
retiring. I don't think she wants to use that word, but
Okay,
she's
well,
retiring.
her services will not be available to us in the future.
Yep.
And that we sought a broad sweep of applicants. We researched the names and the backgrounds, their websites, to determine who we thought would be most applicable, including what Tara had recommended.
Okay.
In other words, we have to move on.
Yeah,
And we'll find somebody who has a broad range of experience that is with working with planning boards like ours, with municipalities like ours, and to have experience in matters like drafting, legal, and ordinances. In other words, people who know what they're talking about, who can assist us. We are a group of volunteers, citizens, but occasionally we need engineering expertise, and we need resource that is like rainwater runoff expertise, construction expertise, and there are organizations out there who have this broad range of experience that's available to municipalities like ours.
and Mark, you said we have a possibility of, well, we boiled it down to 2.
The plan that your subcommittee came up with was to take whatever qualification statements came in, they'll review them. They'll get it down to 2 or 3. They'll conduct interviews, and rank order those 2 or 3, based on an evaluation, matrix. And then they will have, priority number 1 will be the firm that comes in and talks to the board in its entirety, makes a presentation to you, and then move forward from there. You can decide whether or not you'd like to continue the process with that firm or whether you'd like to go to number 2. And you'll see the whole board will see the matrix and the evaluation criteria. But the actual interviews, the actual discussions will be with the subcommittee so that they can weed that out, so it's not such a long process.
Mhm.
Yeah, then the subcommittee will make a recommendation.
Yeah.
And then we can invite that group to come here. But a request for qualifications does not specify cost
Until you've selected
until
the
we've made
firm you want to
the
work.
selection, and then we will discuss with them what it would cost to have them serve our interests.
Mhm.
And then the final recommendation will be made and the board will vote.
Okay. Do we have when do we have to have this done by? December or?
Well, you have to have everything in place and the number settled for the budget by December, yes.
Right,
And
Yes.
so the subcommittee's timeline is to, by the end of the month, we'll have the initial packets turned in, and they will work within a week or 2 to conduct the interviews. And
Yes.
we're hoping that the November planning board meeting, they would have a recommendation for you.
So I think the deadline for submissions is October 22,
Yeah,
23.
something like that, right, too.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good. Do anybody have any other questions about the RFQ or anything? Okay.
Want me to go see if he's here?
Let's talk to James.
Yeah, could you?
We could hop to. Leave it for,
Yeah, no, I would like Tara to be on board as well.
Well, Tara's not gonna be here for another half hour.
Yeah,
She has a recommendation on parking that I would like. I don't wanna have this conversation with Chief and then have to have it again with Tara.
right,
So if you have something you can do for a half an hour, that would be helpful.
right. That's what I'm working on. I'm gonna actually give her a little text, see if she can come earlier.
but we could do committee reports too and get that out of the way.
Okay.
and-
Why don't we do that? Sure.
Is that okay with everyone? Okay, so I'll start. So Town Core Working Group met on Tuesday. And so the AARP program is in the select board's hands. I spoke to Wendy too. They were gonna discuss it yesterday. The 2 meetings ago, they said they would put it on the agenda for yesterday, which I did not see it on there. On the agenda,
We had a
so,
whole bunch of other stuff.
I'm sorry,
We did not get a chance to get to it, but they have special meetings coming up.
okay,
We can-
so it's in their hands whether or not we want to move forward with the program. So I guess defer to when, I guess Rich would be our contact person for that. Okay, then the pedestrian study, so far we have had, through the meeting on Tuesday, 40 responses. And my understanding is it's also going out the tax bills, right? The QR code or no? So we might get more responses. So anybody out there, please, look at the pedestrian studies, but so far, it seems that the sidewalks and the multi-use paths are still the priority for people with And as of now, too, with parking being the least priority. The second was kind of a combination of, lighting within the town. So I think that, we're moving forward with what it seems to be what the town says or feels are priorities. But again, it would be great if we had a lot more responses, a lot more opinions. We discussed also the Boulder Path Road design. I believe that we're gonna get costs on 3 proposals. The group came up with one, which was aesthetically and safety wise, we felt was the most appropriate. It was more expensive, the most expensive, above average, but I was trying to and I didn't really get an answer as far as a difference between the proposals that were average cost versus above average cost, but I think it's because we
It's
didn't have
whether-
it really yet.
It's whether or not,
Because
the
the
road-
one we wanted would move the road, would physically move the road, so that's gonna be more expensive versus other ones where you're just repurposing and but they're gonna get the 3 costs, so we'll get 3 different options on them.
Yeah.
We discussed playground, potentially maybe incorporating kind of an instrument, along either the waterfront. It was brought up potentially maybe near, in front of the ice arena, kind of down around Corcoran's Pond, just to kind of more engage the waterfront. And potentially looking at, instruments or a playground. So that was just discussed. We also talked about the lighting. So if anybody could go look at the new solar lighting, there's one out here at Town Hall for the pinions, and then the bridge also, I believe, to potentially move forward if we like that design. And I think that was pretty much it that we discussed. So that was, Town Hall Working Group. So Conservation Commission. Any questions on that?
I have a question on the lighting. So I noticed this design out here you're talking about, is that a solar panel on that?
Yes.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about that? Were you thinking about, when you talk lighting in the town, were you thinking about going solar throughout the
Or
whole?
getting people's opinion, yeah, I mean, that's one option, definitely.
Mhm.
And what do people think about the design of it? Try and come by at night to see what it looks like,
Mhm.
when it's on. Well, it's initially expensive, but over the time, it's gonna be a cost savings because
Yeah,
we won't be dependent on the co-op.
maybe a question for you, Mark, on the lighting. Those solar panels, when they light up the light at night, is there a little battery in there or something? How does that, is that how that works?
There's
It
a
stores
battery.
the power in the battery? Okay. Nice.
But before we get into engineering and looking at where lights would be and that sort of thing, we want to make sure that the look of the light and the fact, the solar panel is large and that sort of thing, thinking about that being all around town where we have the current carriage lights.
Yeah.
at minimum. That's the type of feedback we want. Is that the type of lighting that you want? Our only option with the co-op right now is to go back to telephone poles with the silver street light fixture. So that's what we're gonna be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to find a way, because solar allows us to disconnect completely from the co-op. Not have any streetlights maintained by them, it would be maintained by the town. We can put them basically wherever the town wants them, because
Yeah,
for the most part, there's a few restrictions, but not as many as trying to connect it to existing electrical systems.
yeah, so it sounds like there's a huge savings there as well.
Well, in the long run, they're way more expensive to put up because the
Yeah.
co-op will come in and put streetlights up for very little or nothing, but it will be the old fashioned.
Right, but if you had to put one somewhere where there was no wiring, you'd have to run the
Exactly.
line.
Yeah,
So you'd have to trench it and
correct.
there's another cost
That
factor.
does not occur with the solar
Mhm.
lights. And we're also trying them out over the winter, you know, and making sure this is a very shaded area, it's a low lying area. We know if the light works here, it's probably gonna work everywhere else in town,
Sure,
so. But the
Okay.
way that the light casts, the way that the pole itself looks, the fixture, that's the feedback. we need.
okay. Yes, sir.
Daryl Fernandez again. So the town did a phenomenal job with the flags and getting feedback through news and views. I don't think generally people know that there's feedback requests for those lights and where they are. So the vehicle that the town used for the flags worked, I think, very well. Mark, you can speak to whether it actually did or not. But I would suggest that the planning board put a post or have one of us put a post out there with the actual location. So that people can actually know to look at them and know to provide feedback.
Good idea, thank you.
Okay. Oh, Bill.
When does a heavy snow fall?
If I knew that, I'd be playing.
Right.
I would not be here.
So I
See,
know
well,
that-
we'll find out whether they work under snow conditions or not.
Well, yeah, we're gonna have it up all winter, that's what's there.
And I think it was Megan who came and talked about them, it's angled, so the snow would potentially
Fall
fall
off.
And
off.
we have talked to the vendor and they assure us they will. And they're going to be able to make it through the winter, but that's why we're trying it out with one.
Good.
Yeah.
Could you tell me what the Boulder Path Road design is? Is it gonna be the same 3 lanes that,
There are 3 different options. There's one exactly what it looks like today, just There's one with exactly what we built in Snow's Brook Road, Tecumseh and Valley Road. And then there's another one that has granite curbing and a raised sidewalk, like the sidewalk between Village and the bridge, Village Road and the bridge on Valley Road. Looks just like that for the entire length with the sidewalk, on the east side of the road. So those are the 3 options that he is costing for the comparison.
east side is the golf course
The east side is yes, the tennis
Golf
court.
course.
tennis court side? Okay.
All right, so, Tara will be on board here in just a few minutes and Chief Pear. We're kind of waiting on her because we want everyone to be on board for this. We're not going over it again. Let's see.
Concom,
Oh, I'm sorry.
conservation.
Yeah, we could, is Paul coming, Charles?
Soon, but I told him that 9 to 9:15 was what you were told.
Yeah, I did tell him that too. Yeah. Like to hold on to that.
Correspondence?
There's nothing on that.
Too efficient today.
Yeah.
I know, I never
Are
expected
you
to.
prepared to talk about what you want to talk about? I mean, we have what Tara sent too.
Yeah,
So, but maybe this is super presentation.
So he can start, we can get,
yeah,
Alicia will run off copies of what Tara sent on parking.
okay,
And Chief can start with his piece of it. And then we can compare that to what Tara said.
yeah. Okay. Steve? Have you got a minute?
Yeah. Talking about alarms.
No, I'm only teasing you. Yeah, Tara will be on here any few
Okay.
minutes, but, can you just start a little bit, maybe just
Yeah.
start a little bit what your concerns are on
What
there?
are the issues you're facing right now
Overall,
overall?
I think the issues we're facing is that, times are changing, is the biggest issue. And I think our intent for some of our ordinances are exactly what they are, the intent, but I think they need to be updated a little bit, just to, capture the times we're in. We're getting complaints for campers, at different places, Golden Eagle, Black Bear. And then we've had some discussion about campers at residences. So we just overall looked at the parking ordinance that we did adopt, was it last year, Mark? We adopted it last year, we took the language out of the zoning ordinance. And I think another issue we're running into is not having them in both sections, because if you change one, you have to make sure the other is changed. So, and that was a conversation with Tara the other day, so it's just kind of looking at it and getting a more updated 2024-25 version of that ordinance.
Bill,
What are the complaints?
Campers, trailers, snowmobile trailers. We'll get complaints for at residences, at hotels, the ice arena, resort parking and outside of town square. Trying to think, a truck with a camper on the back of it. And I think what's come down to is everything's changed. And I did some research, I actually met with Paul Saulnier, he did a really good presentation to me on what is considered a camper nowadays. And I think that's changed. I think the essence of the ordinance was to, I think it's always no junkyards in town. Nobody wants junkyards in town. But at the same time, we don't want people sleeping in campers in the parking lots. We don't want that. So I think we're trying to capture it all, but if you just do motor homes, technically nowadays, and I've been educated, but over here too, but but I mean, Rob, sorry. Daryl. But I've been educated by him as well on when you go to register a motor home, a B is easily driven. It's a van nowadays. It's your Mercedes vans. You see them up at the mountain a lot. You see them all over the place. You see them in everybody's driveway. The way it's written is that ours is written that it can be seen from a residence, commercial, or a public way. We've talked about maybe that's a little too much. And should it just be a public way, like our dumpsters are on that end? So I think it's just an overall look at the different issues we've had. Are we able to enforce it in Windsor Hill, which you can't see from a public way? I don't think we can. But I've also added something to the language looking at not allowing people to sleep in vehicles, period, from dawn from dusk to dawn.
Mhm.
So I think it's just that's the overall encompassing is trailers, snowmobile trailers, campers, parked in driveways, stuff of that sort. So I think it's just a good look at what we're trying to get to.
Because I think that the intent when the ordinance was written was that the neighbors don't want to look at these trailers, campers parked on adjacent properties.
Mhm.
That was the initial thrust of the ordinance. Then came this issue of we don't want people sleeping in them. In other words, that this is not substitute housing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, but the people who are here now have vehicles that they use as their personal vehicle that is really classified as a camper.
Understood.
And so you have this back and forth about, I don't want to look at that vehicle, but that vehicle is a person's POV. And so it's a different environment
Mhm.
than the time.
Okay, so we have
that
this gray area.
There is a gray area.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, because it looks like it's a registered
Yeah.
passenger van.
Right, it is.
It's a registered passenger van and it's not a registered as a recreational vehicle.
And that's the difficulty that we're having and what we want to clean up in this. And you have more people who have boats or have recreational vehicles and we have a lot more single-family residences in town than we did at the time that the ordinance was adopted. So you have a lot more opportunity for issues between neighbors. Like you're saying, with one person not wanting to look at a trailer in their neighbor's yard, that's becoming more difficult as we have more development.
And I think that on that, Mark, the hard part is that if you put it from a public way and somebody intentionally is trying to put it behind their shrubs and then the neighbor can see it from across through the woods, I mean, I think it goes a little too far.
Right.
I don't want to see that.
And it makes enforcement very difficult because we only have a certain amount of enforcement authority on private land. You know, so, and what happens if a condo association bylaws, covenants allow it? You know, and now we have the conflict between the town regs and covenants within a development. You know, just things that we need to kind of update where we are as a community right now. And make it clearer so that when Dave is out there as a code enforcement officer or Patrick and his guys get called there from a law enforcement standpoint, we have a little more clarity because it is gray.
Did everyone get a quick look at what Tara suggested for this?
Margaret has a question.
No, I just had one other comment, one other example for you. My neighbor down the hill from me, okay, so their house is situated down below me.
Yeah.
Okay. Their driveway is down below me and they will frequently park their snow sled camper
Okay,
down there in their driveway in front of their garage. I can't see it from my house. But somebody who is walking by will say, oh, I can see that for a public way, that shouldn't be allowed. And my attitude on that is, all of the neighbors are fine with it. We're not, you know, having a problem with them having their particular, you know, tow thing in their driveway where we can't see it. And I don't think that should be something where my neighbors should be bothered when nobody around them is bothered by it. Yeah.
That's a good point, Margaret, yes.
Okay, we have a proposal.
Just for the record though, Morgan, you're the best reader there.
I don't have it in front of me.
Section 259, which is in the heavy print. This is what Tara suggested.
So section 259:84-A, recreation vehicle. Recreation vehicle shall mean a self-propelled or towed vehicle that is equipped to serve as temporary living quarters for recreational, camping, or travel purposes and is used solely as a family or personal conveyance.
So I had suggested that if you decided to keep this section,
As a minimum, like that we need clarification, and I think that as a minimum, I personally would support like defining it a little bit more so that, you know, because times are changing.
So how to approach it?
but for the record, I thought Chief Payer's recommendation to remove the whole section is a great idea. That's if I was gonna weigh in, that would be my recommendation. But what I was saying is, please, if you decide to keep it, at least define recreation vehicle.
All right, if we eliminate it, we replace it with what?
Nothing. In my opinion, there's no need to have this.
Okay, then
There's
it becomes strictly a law enforcement, select board, enforcement problem.
No, they don't have anything to do with where you park something on your property. They control what's on town property. They could control construction trailers as part of the building permit process. They control whether OHRVs ride on town roads. nothing would replace the sections about parking boats and campers on your own property. That's an unusual thing to have in a zoning ordinance. It's more typical in covenants in a homeowners association.
Tara, I do have a question for you. So we also have in there, underneath, it's unregistered vehicles for, I think it's no more than 30 days in a year can be parked. And that was for everywhere in town. Would we not be able to enforce that either if it's, say we're driving by a residence and somebody's car is unregistered for 30 days? If we can see it from a public way, can we?
Where is that?
It's it was, I think it was the last section under, the next section under zoning. Cause I believe we took that out of zoning and added that to the parking ordinance.
It's not in this section in the zoning ordinance. It wouldn't belong in the parking ordinance. If you're talking about on private property, it can't be enforced through the parking ordinance. It would be something that would belong in zoning, and that's more typical, and that's how people, that's how towns make sure they don't end up with something that looks and feels like a junkyard. That's
I think that was the intent of this in the day, was to not have that.
But I'd have to look to see where that is in the zoning. That would be, if it isn't in the zoning and only in the parking ordinance, that's something we could put in the zoning in place of this section.
And there's nothing in state law that does that, right, Chief?
There is something to do with, that does cover state law.
State law talks about a number that makes it kick in the state definition of junkyard. But not whether or not you can do it.
Have to.
So is there a combination maybe of, like you had mentioned earlier, Chief, about if something's from a public way, you know, if it's seen from a public way, you know, and obviously the non-registration of, you know, vehicles, and then also redefining what we're talking about as far as, you know, tightening up what it is that we're talking about, a recreational vehicle that would be subject to these changes.
If I could just hop in on that, it's not unheard of to require that they be parked. We wouldn't usually say not visible from a public way, because that's a little bit subjective, but you might say that it has to be not in the front yard or something like that.
Yes, Charles. Just ID yourself, Charles.
Charles Hastings, speaking just as an individual now, not from the Conservation Commission. I would hate to see the town remove, even though it might be simpler, remove this item entirely. I speak from the perspective of where I used to live in Michigan, in a homeowners association, where we did have restrictions, as Tara mentioned, on how many vehicles, how many campers would be parked on the lot. And without that, at least in Michigan, lots get quickly filled up with ATVs, snowmobiles, various vehicles. It becomes an eyesore. And I think, although I don't see that same danger here in our community, I think it's good for the town to have some sort of ordinance that controls that. Thank you.
So I just searched for unregistered, and in the junkyard section, it says,
Page
Yeah.
27.
I was just gonna say that.
sorry,
Yep, thank you. Yep.
But I think that what Charles was saying, I think that accomplishes that. The junkyard idea, or the too many vehicles, is if they're registered vehicles and they look decent, and I'll use Daryl for example. That's not a cheap camper. That is a very nice vehicle that could classify as a Class B recreational vehicle if you register it that way. And then it comes down to insurance questions on, you're only gonna, it's because it comes as a chassis, and I know somebody has a Winnebago that's on a Dodge Ram chassis. When they first registered it, it was a Dodge Ram. That's not a recreational vehicle, but that's only $50,000 coverage on a $300,000 or $150,000 Class B. So if they change the title, then it becomes a recreational vehicle. So the only other thing me and Mark had bounced off back and forth is permanent. It has to have a permanent bed in it, but do we want to go that far with going so far down with, it has to be, can't be longer than this length, it has to have no permanent bathrooms, because most of these, and Daryl again can speak to this more than I, but a lot of you get in it and it's your regular van, but then you push a button and the bed drops down. So how far do we go down looking at how many specs we have?
That makes it,
Under this.
in trying to get that much detail makes
Yeah.
enforcement virtually impossible.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. Wow,
because you're always parsing things.
yeah.
So, you know, whether it's a number of trailers or a number of vehicles, however you want to deal with it, if you want to keep it, or those are the sorts of issues, or do you want to just do away with it?
Can we put a number on it?
Yep, and would length be, is that easy? That's easy to, you know, you're not going inside somebody's vehicle, you're just. And I don't know what, you know, something, a trailer versus, you know, like a recreational van, you know, they're gonna be different lengths, so maybe that's something that's easy to enforce. I mean, it either it is or it isn't.
Well, here's the hard part, is then you start to go on people's properties and do you need a search warrant to go up there with a tape measure and.
Mm.
What's my perspective versus one of my guys' perspective on, is it too long from a distance? Again, Daryl, sorry, I'm gonna use you. If I go down Flat Mountain, it's a public, it's a public way, I can enforce laws on that no matter what, but the town stops at a certain point. So Daryl's vehicle, the way I can't see it at all.
Okay,
So
so
but
but
even
then
if
it's
it's a
not
little bit
visible.
larger, I'm driving down that road because it's a public way and I enforce the laws on it, but then I go, oh yeah, it's not on a public way, I can't enforce that.
Right.
So it's just, it makes it very tricky from an enforcement standpoint.
So then, but then do we go back to whether it's visible from a public, because if you're saying it's not, then, I mean, it's not
Right.
visible, it's not visible, I mean. You know,
All right, it's a clouded issue. Is there a recommendation? Is there a way you want to deal with this?
Recommendation was to remove it
just to,
And get rid of it?
because of these enforcement type of issues.
Tara, I did propose something in our parking ordinance, but if you're saying we can't now, so it's making it. Where would we add in that we don't want people sleeping in or occupying any vehicle to sleep from dusk until dawn? Cause I know I have done research and that is in other parking ordinances throughout the state. But
That-
obviously.
That could
reality-
be in the parking ordinance on public property.
Okay,
but on somebody's private land, you have an RV
right.
on their private land, someone could spend the night in there, because it's their private property, then what we're saying, if we got rid of it.
For most of the towns that I work with, I've written a section about temporary use of RVs. I'm not remembering that you have that language, but it would allow your cousins to be in their RV in your driveway for so many days.
Maybe that's what we should look at, not do anything today, just look at. That idea, because I don't think that's what the intent, I don't think we want people sleeping. All over the place in campers, I don't think that's. An end goal, that's not, from what I've talked to people, they don't want to see that, so maybe that's a route we go. Was looking at other towns' ordinances, zoning ordinances for sleeping or how many days or.
Yeah, and
parking-
I've written a whole bunch of those, so there's, you know, some that you could
That's
look
the
at and that gets your arms around it because you have a permissive zoning ordinance.
So just, we do not allow anyone to sleep in the
You
parking
guys
lots on
call
our
us.
property, and we
Yeah.
call the folks around there, call the police department when we see someone doing that.
Okay, so the private property owner can make a rule
Absolutely.
and ask the police to enforce it.
And that's just a trespassing issue.
Hmm.
Comes down to, you don't want somebody on your property.
So if a troublesome ordinance is eliminated, then the recommendation could be for you to come back and tell us what you found with regard to what other communities are doing vis-a-vis this sleeping problem. We could do that?
Yeah, I think Tara said she's done ordinances on that already, so
Okay,
that might be something that we look into.
that is, my concern was to just eliminate that ordinance. Okay, it's troublesome and it doesn't really solve the problem to have it in the books. What do you want to use for your reasonable enforcement throughout the community? It seems to me that we should replace it with something.
Well, I think, and Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but the hardest part, the reason we put it in the parking ordinance is because there wasn't much of an enforcement when it's in the zoning. You can
It
enforce it.
becomes Dave and Jim's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So
I understand.
it changes it from a simple parking summons
Yeah.
to potentially a civil issue. So it's completely different issues, so, but as Tara's saying, if we take it out of here altogether, then we lose it on the parking side. So I don't know if a decision is made today, I don't know if it's more discussion, more research, more even conversation with Tara on going forward with, how do we go forward with it? I don't think it'd be a good idea just to make a decision today, because to me, we've got a lot of new information today, so I think it's a little bit more research before we make the decision.
Okay, I think that's what we're
I
going.
agree with that. Yeah.
So we'll just continue it to November.
Yep.
Okay,
So in November, you should be deciding what you're gonna have a public hearing on for zoning amendments. I think it'd be helpful if I had some direction today on what you'd like to see for November and think about it. And what I'm hearing is maybe something like not parking in the setbacks, and if you put in a temporary, you can have your cousin sleeping for 2 weeks thing, you have a permissive zoning ordinance, so that would get your arms around nothing more than that would be allowed. That would add some clarity on the sleeping in the RV on the lot.
Yes,
and could we come up with a proposal for the trailer part of because
Yes.
it's more than just the RV
Yeah.
ride.
Right.
and
So
the
you've got
definition.
The trailers, and you've got the recreational vehicles.
Snowmobiles.
So if we can come up, maybe put a number on that. For the limitation, rather than just banning them outright, so you can balance. People who wanna have them with the issues that Charles has.
But I thought part of this was getting rid of L and replacing it with something more moderated.
Yes. Okay. And okay means I think that's acceptable. Any other comment?
I had one other question,
Well-
because I think Tara had mentioned something about public parking as well, and do we have the appropriate sleeping and public parking areas covered? So I didn't know if that needed to be an amendment or not.
That doesn't go in the zoning.
Okay,
The select board doesn't need the town meeting to approve that. The select board can make the rules for public land and public roads.
But we're gonna clarify too, or do we want to? I'm asking the question. I mean, I would support clarifying though, then the definition of what it is so that it's, because vans are becoming a lot, more somebody's vehicle versus just RV kind of thing. So also having something that clarifies what we're talking about as a recreational vehicle. Whether it's, sort of,
Yeah,
30.
so I wrote, what my notes to follow up on would be to replace L with something about not in the setbacks, temporary sleeping, and that things are clearly defined.
Yes. We need to
do that.
And then we'll come back with language in November.
Okay.
Okay, chief, that good?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So we're tabling it until November.
Got it.
And we have further
Thank you.
recommendations.
Or-
It's all good. So, I'm so disappointed.
Okay, we don't need a motion or a vote for it. We're just gonna do this.
Yeah, right.
Okay, Tara, question? Is the parking ordinance, is that planning board ordinance or is that select board ordinance?
Select board.
Good. Done.
Okay, moving on to old business, I guess. We have a couple of items here. Zoning amendments. Want to hit those first? I know Tara had some thoughts on the zoning amendments as well.
So I drafted, you had already had the steep slopes from the working group to think more about. I drafted shorelines and the guts of floodplain that if you decide to go forward with it, then the bigger project is building the flood insurance stuff around it. So I didn't do that yet.
Okay. Any other discussion on that zoning amendments?
Okay.
Do we want to start with, then we have to just, so the shoreline, I mean, I liked what was written. I would question, in the verbiage, it talked about 50 feet. And I was looking at the other attachment of what other towns have done. And, you know, the Carroll's at 10 feet. There were a couple that were at 25 feet. I think 50 feet as a blanket might be a bit much. There was a town that was 35. Because if we're talking about, you know, things along the pond, you know, 50 feet's, you know, a lot. And, you know, do we want to include the west branch, the west branch of the Mad River, Snowsbrook, Cascade Brook? You know, my question would be, do we change, just lower the footage a little bit? Can we talk about that, or?
Full disclosure, I wrote Carol's and 10 feet was the only way I could get them to move forward on it.
Yeah.
And 10 feet's better than nothing.
Right.
100 feet is what the science supports. 100 feet is what all of the studies for decades have showed gets the most effective vegetative buffer. You know, I put in 50 because that's consistent with the state in terms of the vegetation and setback. And it would be, the argument for 50 is it makes enforcement easier because it's the same then for every waterway in town. I think I think there's a good argument for not including the pond. There's, you know, there are issues around there are agreements the town made with the resort. Anything around the pond, you're gonna have in your hands for site plan review, and you can put conditions in that. You can require setbacks in that and best management practices and work through that as part of the site plan process. So I think there's a good argument for leaving that out and just doing the West Branch and Snowsbrook and the what's the one hanging out of town?
Cascade Brook, and then there was the one over by Sandwich.
Yeah.
But my only concern with the pond,
Wanna Lancet.
it was the sediment, the development, you know, the sediment that would go into the pond with, you know, that we have to be mindful of that when we're, you know, developing that area.
Oh, yeah, and that's what I was saying, you wanna be sure and take a really close look at that in any site plan application you get near the pond.
So that puts it on, okay.
Right, but there's no point in having restriction if it's not enforceable. There's no point in having restriction and if it's gonna be ineffective.
Why would it be ineffective?
No, I'm saying that at 10 feet doesn't sound like it's
Oh,
ineffective. 50 feet sounds like it would probably work.
So,
100 feet is, that's what the scientists want. But it appears as if 50 feet is both effective and enforceable.
okay,
Why wouldn't 100 feet be effective or enforceable?
Because it's
it
not a-
is. It is, but can you get it passed? If you can't get it passed, you don't have nothing. That's why Carroll has 10 feet and Lisbon has 25, because it was, you have to read the room too.
Yeah, so is, the recommendation is to not have anything other than the New Hampshire state law for the pond and create,
The New Hampshire state law doesn't cover the pond.
okay. It's only for rivers.
Only covers the main stem of the Mad River.
did you have a comment?
Tara,
You
would
have,
it,
Oh, or Alan, go ahead.
I mean, you say you're suggesting maybe we leave the pond out of it. I would look at it the other way. Keep the pond in and let them ask for a variance.
That's where I am leaning to.
I would agree.
It's the most important thing in our town. That is the center of our town. We've already have issues with, like, we're dredging it again. So why not do what we can to protect it, to decrease the chances that we have to spend literally millions of dollars in the near future? If there's going to be a lot of development around it.
I mean, so full disclosure, my degrees are in natural resource planning and I've written 2 of the model shoreline ordinances. So I love hearing this. I just wondered if you'd have an easier time getting it passed without the pond, and is why I brought that up. From the pond's perspective, it would definitely benefit from being included.
Yeah.
I would think people would want the pond included, because
Yeah.
that's what they're most familiar with. Is
Yeah.
from all the other waterways.
Mhm.
in the
Okay.
Mad River.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, because it's our job to act in the best interest of the community.
And I just want, I'm not sure I remembered to put this in the write-up, but there are no mapped intermittent streams on private land in Waterville Valley. So that eliminated that question of whether there was anything else we should be picking up.
Tara, can I ask you a question about item G? A permanent 6-foot wide path?
Yep.
Can you tell me what permanent means? Does it mean paved? Or does it mean, what does it mean?
Yeah, it could.
Because to me, paved contradicts everything else we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, well, permanent is in all of the models that we've had vetted by lawyers and whatnot, because it's saying that if you have waterfront property, you have a right to have a real access to it. So it means not just mowed through grass, or it does mean structural.
Mark, you look like you have a question.
No,
Okay.
I'm just wondering, what are we talking about here? The Wanna-Lancet property is in current use. It has nothing to do with our town.
Okay.
We can cover it, but okay, that's a feel-good thing. It's in the middle of the wilderness area of the White Mountain National Forest, so go ahead. But I'm wondering, if we're just talking about West Branch Road, we're only talking about a few private houses. I'm not understanding what water bodies other than the pond we're impacting here.
Well, Mark, why wouldn't all those house lots on the West Branch matter in that
Oh, no.
shoreline?
Water, I'm just saying, I think part of the answer to the question from the town will be, what property does this affect?
And that's why I provided these maps. I didn't realize the the Wanalancet property was in the wilderness portion of the forest.
I'm sorry, I missed that's what I asked at the beginning was I did not see the maps, I'm sorry.
Well, I provided all the maps so that the board and later the public hearing could have that information.
Was it-
I had a semantics question.
Wait a minute.
Tara.
Just
I
one
got
minute.
it.
James, you had your hand up?
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that, if you're looking at this, with regard to the pond, that you look at, there are recorded easements and agreements between the town and the water bill company that were recorded when the town, acquires a pond from the water bill company, and look at, there is certain easements and agreements in there, so I would like you to look at that with regard to any, ordinance you're gonna put in place and see if there are any issues that conflict between those two.
Right, we got that, yeah.
How do we get that information?
It's a recorded,
We have-
recorded in the
Right.
Grafton County. The recorded deed with with Grafton County, so I'm sure the town has a copy of it.
We do have to look at that now.
Except from a kind of good spirit, I can't think of the right word, perspective, having the rights to something doesn't stop a zoning change from precluding it.
Are you suggesting someone can use zoning to eliminate a legally deeded easement?
Sure. I own 20 acres, some of it is wetland, I own it. But the town could pass something saying I can't build on a portion of it. And I still own it. Absolutely. An easement is no more precedent over zoning than owning something outright.
This is just a semantics question, Tara, on 5C. So when we talk about, so they're saying, the last line of 5C approved by New Hampshire DES, when associated with an allowed use, and then in points D, D through, with the lower ones where it says a permitted use. Or constructed, facilities may be in D where at the last line is may be constructed by a permitted use. Why is there a difference versus allowed versus permitted?
Because
You have to apply for one and the other one you don't apply. Like,
we might be able to improve that, but allowed use means within your zoning.
so you don't have to.
And when
apply.
I say permitted by DES, that's a DES permit.
Okay, so you have to apply for that. Okay.
But like all of these in an overlay district, and it maybe is confusing that I added it to only one of these, but because I have it in the intro section, provided they're allowed in the underlying district. Maybe I confused things by adding it there.
And then in point I, if the group could discuss, because I want to throw this out there, it talks about that, again, we're encouraging in ground cover, things like that, to use non-invasive, but plantings, but can't we, but it's encouraged but not required. Do we want to make it required? I mean, do we really want invasive plant species near our waterways like that? I would like we could discuss that.
So we could turn that around, that you can't require, this is saying you'd like to see somebody restore the vegetated buffer, and you can't require that. So it may be a different thought.
Okay.
That you could require that if somebody does plantings, they use native, non-invasive. But you can't require them to replant the cleared areas. If their lawn goes right up to the river, they have a right to maintain that.
But we could require, if it's something new, that it be non-invasive native species.
Yes.
Okay.
I interpreted it that way, thinking they aren't gonna introduce
Okay.
invasive species.
Okay.
It would be nice if they got rid of them if they were there, but you can't demand that.
Okay.
Yeah, I could add that as another, I could put it in 6.
Okay.
I could make a 6D that plantings be native, non-invasive.
Okay, are we making progress?
I think we're good.
Okay.
We move on to the next, we want to do floodplain?
Well, do we need to make a recommendation or have anything?
Are we
or-
accepting it?
Well, you're gonna look at, you didn't have these in your hands long, and I think you'll wanna process it, think about them and talk about them again in November. Decide whether to have a December public hearing.
Okay, that
Decide
sounds
in
right.
November what you're gonna move forward to public hearing. I wouldn't want you to make a decision a couple days after getting it.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to have it and be able to start next steps.
Okay, so generally, I would say we like it with a few modifications. It becomes presentable. Did we resolve the 50 feet, 100 feet, 10 feet?
Why don't you think about that? Have that be, that and the pond be some things to think about for the next meeting. I'll make these changes, but think about. Talk to your neighbors, see what you think is gonna be acceptable, talk to the other conservation commission members and.
Is there a way I can get a copy of the easements, or is that like public knowledge, or is that like I can just search it on or request it from Grafton County?
I'll get them, we have them upstairs.
Okay.
Okay, then you'll distribute them?
Yeah.
Good.
So for now, we can table. what's on the
Continue it to
agenda,
November.
At least that one.
Go over that. One, and next time we'll.
We still have what, steep slopes to talk about?
Floodplain, yeah.
Well,
John?
Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, Charles Hastings, speaking now for the Conservation Commission. We were asked to be present for this meeting. I'm not clear quite what our role can be here, except to speak up from time to time. If the Conservation Commission is to be providing substantial input on all three of these environmental issues you're addressing, we need to have that information. I have not seen I actually sped through all 3.5 hours of your September 12th meeting last night to get aware of what's going on. I understand that there were some maps that were being prepared by Tara and other information. And if we're going to provide some feedback to the planning board, the CC needs to get information as an organization so that we can discuss it as a group instead of just one or two of us. And in fact, we're not supposed to talk about it except as a group among ourselves. So I would like to know more about what's going on. For example, I'm very interested in one of your big issues in September 12th was deciding what areas were to be covered by shoreline. And I listened to about 10 minutes of that discussion. And I'd like to know what was the resolution of that. There are waterways that do not appear on the USGS maps, but do appear on more recent Waterloo Valley maps that go right through. One of them is a parallel stream that runs just to the south of Snow's Brook, all the way into Corcoran Pond. It crosses cross-country trails in about 4 places. It is a significant waterway. It runs, I think, all year round. The upper part of it did dry up a few weeks ago during that long dry spell, but for the most part, it is a year-round stream. It goes right into Corcoran Pond. It will be affected by, I assume, by much of the development plans that are being considered for the Corcoran Pond area. And I would like to know, would there be some authority that the planning board or the CC would, the CC has no authority, but could it advise on what happens to that brook? Will it just be shoved into a culvert and go underground? Who has the authority on that? Is that even going to be mentioned? Because it doesn't sound like from what I've been hearing, you're concerned about Snow's Brook, Mad River, and maybe Corcoran Pond, maybe not. There was mention of tributaries at the September 12th meeting. We need to know as a CC, what are you covering under this? There are many issues we have in terms of the steep slopes and downslope movement. Again, we need some more information so that we can provide useful feedback to you as an organization. So I would ask in advance of your November planned meeting that the CCB provided enough information that we can have a meaningful discussion as a group at one of our either regular or special meetings to give you some input on that. Thank you.
Just so everyone knows, I invited Charles in. So we really have not in the past elaborated commission on different subjects, and I thought this one was important for feedback with the commission and with us. So that's why he's here today.
But if I could just I'm happy to make sure the Conservation Commission gets these as revised. To reassure him a little bit, the subdivision regulations have been strengthened to ensure that stormwater is managed on site, so that waterways like that aren't affected and receiving sedimentation, and the site plan regulations are gonna have that same content, hopefully by the end of the year. So I don't think that, runoff is being ignored.
That helps Charles a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll continue to do this. It is quite important that you be on board.
Are the memos that we used to consider and have these discussions, are they put on the town's website for them or no?
Like this information?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
no, okay.
No.
I mean, I just need, if you want me or Tara to send it to someone, I just need to be told.
I kind of assumed that where the planning board has always had a liaison with the Conservation Commission, that's how those things happened. That the liaison, whoever that is at the time, would bring things the planning board's considering to the Conservation Commission and say, what do you think?
So, yeah, I am that person, but I thought this was, we really have never had the commission come on board to discuss it as we are discussing the floodplains and all the other amendments there, but I thought physically you should be here to hear it out. And we can report back, you and I can both report back to the commission.
So John, when I send the kind of, there's been a couple of tweaks. When I send that version out, you can get it to everybody on the Conservation Commission and make sure it's that your wife puts it on the next agenda.
Yep, I got you. I will do that. So. Anything else on this one? Anything else, Kathy, you have another thought?
On the shorelines,
The
I'm good.
shoreline. And we had
We had floodplain and then steep slope. Did we even want to talk about those?
yeah, shoreline, steep slope and
In the floodplain.
floodplain.
I mean,
Any other?
I'm fine with them. I didn't have any.
So the floodplain, I started using the model that of mine that DES published, and then I realized because it was kind of written with a different group of editors and scientists and whatnot and lawyers than the shoreline, it didn't really match anymore over time. So I I kind of went back to the drawing board to make sure that it was consistent with shoreline, because obviously they overlap, right? So it didn't make sense to allow something in one and not the other. So you'll see a lot of similar language in floodplain permitted uses as the shoreline. Prohibited is a little different, because there we want to not take away flood storage, and we want to not put something in that can float downstream, get washed downstream. But we also want to recognize there's one house right now in the floodplain. If you had a chance to look at the floodplain maps, there's one house in the floodplain. So we want to give that person an opportunity to apply for a conditional use permit to add an accessory structure or an addition, and that's where the conditional use permits come in.
Kara, where is that one house? Cause I couldn't pull up the map.
Is it out on
West Branch Road?
I think so. I only have the tiny version of the map in my hand.
Like it might be either the Sullivans or the property next door that are down.
That name doesn't sound right. If you said the name, I'd recognize it, but.
Who bought the Britons.
Is there Patain? Is that right?
That sounds.
Is that who bought the Britons?
Britons house, okay.
That's the house.
Okay.
Surprised I remembered it, but it just popped in my mind.
There is a house on the other side of Triple Line, not far from here.
They're not in,
That's not town.
it is town.
It's not floodplain.
It's not floodplain.
But it's not in the floodplain that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't think Dave would have let it be built in the floodplain, but.
Well, you don't have any restrictions on that now.
Without telling us that there is, he does talk to them because the Mad River is protected by the Shoreland Protection Act.
Yes.
They're at least 50 feet back, and then you get into the other sections of, so I don't know how far the floodplain extends in that particular area down.
Yeah, you have flood insurance requirements, so it has to be flood proofed or elevated, but yeah, I think you only have one house in the floodplain right now.
Wow.
So this would make it, if these people that are near the floodplain, would have to at least try to add an accessory structure or addition that's out of the floodplain, if possible.
Do you have that on your screen?
Yeah, the maps are the same maps
floodplain.
as what we were just talking about.
I can pull it up. I don't have it there now.
They're the same water bodies.
The map, if you have the master plan, at home on your computer or whatnot, the floodplain map is in there, and you could enlarge that to see as well.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on this? We'll just table all of these. We can review a lot of them and talk about it.
I didn't have any objection to what I read here about the floodplain, and that I think it's presentable. Meaning that we could then go to public meeting. And eventually make its way to vote at the town meeting.
Alan, anything on your end?
No, I think we're good.
Okay,
Move on.
steep slope.
So steep slopes you've had for a month, so you might be able to talk in more detail there.
So my understanding is that really this just kicks in if it's a greater than 15% and the structure is going to be bigger than 1,000 square feet.
Right. For any site disturbance. Not just a structure.
Bigger than 1,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tara, could you give some clarification to what is meant, that is grading and cut and fill should not exceed 1/2. What is meant by grading and cut?
The grading, cut and fill when
Yes.
you're rearranging a banking,
Okay, so you're gonna build something and,
you may be rearranging the banking alongside a driveway or to make a driveway. This manages how steep the slope can end up. So it'll be one foot up for every 2 horizontal.
it's the other way around. One vertical to
One
2.
vertical for 2 horizontal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if it is 50%, that means that it can't be made any steeper than that?
The final slope can't be any steeper than that.
Yeah.
If it's being disturbed. It's not talking about what you do to slopes already there, but it's talking about how it has to end up if you're disturbing a slope.
Okay,
Because past a certain level of steepness, replanting doesn't really work. It just washes away in a heavy storm.
Mark, I have a question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but it'd probably if anyone could, it'd be you. There are up at North Face, there's a bunch of trees being cut down, and just below it, there are some homes, I believe. Wouldn't this apply to that situation? I mean, couldn't the erosion go down? I don't really know how that would apply or how to even.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Wouldn't apply to tree cutting.
So, but wouldn't, if they were all clear, say for instance, that they were clear cut, wouldn't it cause some erosion down below and affect the homes below it? And
Maybe, but that's a tougher thing to regulate
okay,
as opposed to disturbing the ground.
Right, are they removing the tree stumps? Because those will maintain it for a while.
yeah, that was one of the considerations. Read it, but in other words, when people cut down trees in order to improve view, does that then supplement or cause erosion?
yeah.
And will this ordinance have anything to say about it? I didn't see anything that said that if you cut down the trees to improve the view and you increase the risk of erosion, that, you know, when you do something about it, is it
Well, it looks like
allowed, not allowed?
F number 4, all development, including grading, clearing, and construction of driveways shall provide for the retention of native topsoil, stabilization of steep hillsides, prevention of erosion, and consequent sedimentation of streams and water courses.
But the key word there is all development, and that's not cutting the trees. If you're just cutting the trees for a view or right, because you want to,
Yeah.
or for firewood, that's not development, and that's a tougher thing to regulate. It's really in a gray area in terms of land use regulation.
Okay,
Well, and number 2 says, like, existing natural and topographic features, including the vegetation cover, will be preserved to the greatest extent possible. In the event that extensive amounts of vegetation are removed, the site shall be replanted with indigenous vegetation and shall replicate the original vegetation as much as possible.
But again, that's triggered by a land use permit.
Okay,
But what I interpreted was that vegetation removed, that means to cut the trees down.
No, they
No.
don't get a permit, they cut trees down.
Right, is it my understanding is that state law is that any landowner can cut the trees down if he wants to.
yeah,
That's why we don't make them get a permit,
Yeah, okay,
because they can.
I
They
hear
can
you.
cut their trees. I mean, removing the stumps, is that development, is that disturbance? I don't know. Carl would have
splitting
to
hairs.
weigh in on that, but just cutting the trees down, that has.
I hear you.
land
Okay.
Yep,
compared
okay.
to your trees.
And it doesn't take much to get the Timberland Owners Association lawyer to a meeting, I can tell you from experience. If you go too close to that gray area.
okay.
So has anybody attempted to do anything with this stump removal issue, or is it moot?
I don't know more than that.
I think Rick was working on the steep slopes. But he's not here to talk about it.
Yeah,
We
Okay.
didn't talk about that issue in that meeting,
Okay,
in the work group meeting, because it's not really within the zoning power if it's not development.
okay.
that's
got it.
fair.
Okay, I hear you.
Yeah.
So the development of this ordinance looks good, and we can accept it as is, a few modifications.
Were there modifications to this one? I didn't note any.
I don't think so.
No,
Maybe somebody else had a comment, but
So I had something else for you to think about for the November meeting that I'll need to know before I can finalize these for a public hearing. There's 2 different places in the ordinance they could go. They could go at the end of Article 4, zoning districts and regulations as new sections. Or they could, we could make Article 6, that's the floodplain overlay, be overlay districts and put floodplain, shoreline, and steep in there. So you'll need to kind of look at your ordinance and think about where you see these overlay districts fitting, so that I can write the final, write the hearing notice accordingly.
so what was the first spot?
I thought they could go at the end of Article 4, zoning districts and regulations, because they're zoning districts. But then I got thinking, well, floodplain is its own article later. What if we made that article to be overlay districts and had floodplain, shoreline, and steep there? So I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another, but you'll need to decide.
Okay,
okay, could you send us a notice to Mr. Chairman?
yes, Mr. Secretary.
Send us a notice and tell us what sections to look at and what to decide.
Sure.
All right, I can email that out.
Good enough.
I'll email it out. I'll try to remember to email it out with the revised drafts.
Good.
That'll be great. Yep.
Thank you. Okay. I think we can move on.
Any more discussion on this? And we're gonna table it and discuss it in November.
November, yes.
I'm sorry, I have one question.
Charles, go ahead.
In response to some things that Tara just told us, again, Charles Hastings speaking for conservation. So zoning only has authority over development, is what I've just heard.
Hmm.
And that's what the planning board deals with, is plant is development. I'm a little unclear about what actually constitutes development. Is it strictly buildings, garages, driveways? Are there other things besides that that are included? I've seen reference to landscaping somehow being related to development. And if this is the only authority that zoning has over those kinds of things, then my question as a Conservation Commission member, does conservation have should it be engaging itself in other than development issues? In other words, we have no actual authority, we have no enforcement. Is it worth our while to even discuss things that we think are important to the community here regarding conservation that has nothing to do with actual development, such as clear cutting, such as decisions about trees? I heard it came across quite clearly that the planning board should not meddle in any way with a property owner's authority to cut down a tree. I got that loud and clear. Should the CC have any concerns about that? Or are we also out of bounds? I don't know quite where to go with this.
So if I could just qualify that, I mean, it's been established that you can have something like a shoreline ordinance that requires the vegetative buffer to be left intact. It's been challenged several times of whether you can manage someone cutting trees otherwise on their property. And even in the shoreline in one, it wasn't a Superior Court, so it didn't make a statewide precedent, but we did have one court in New Hampshire say that you couldn't restrict logging in the shoreline even. So that's where I'm talking about cutting trees related to development is established, but cutting trees for the view is not. So I think that's a different question than other things the Conservation Commission should weigh in on, but cutting trees is a real controversial area.
Got that right.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
it
I also-
is it's there's a very strong group advocating for not allowing any regulation of it. As I said, and one court in the state sided with them on shorelines, but it's not a statewide precedent. So attorneys have assured me that it's okay to keep going with that.
Is that cup there spilling?
Oh, that's not
Hey.
anymore.
That's terrain change.
But I think the role of the Conservation Commission as an educator of landowners is where there's some value in that.
Is
And I
it
think the master plan, pointed a lot of things to the Conservation Commission for education.
Go ahead.
Is it safe to say that development is terrain change? In other words, to signal to Charles that if we have development occurring, if it is a terrain change, is that Conservation Commission business?
It's only Conservation Commission's only advisory, so I don't know what you mean Conservation Commission's business, but a terrain
right.
change isn't necessarily development. It's development if it's to prepare the site for a building or to change the land use.
Okay, I would interpret development, terrain change to be development.
Not necessarily. I could change the slope of my yard.
Plant plants.
You can go in with your own tractor and change your lawn the
Mhm.
way it looks, and you don't need a permit from the town enforcement office on zoning to do that, unless you're gonna put another building up or whatever triggers the need for the permit would be the development.
Okay,
That's,
but if I truck in dirt and make my property more level,
yeah,
that's not terrain
I-
change?
I just did it at my house this past spring. Brought in truckloads of dirt and leveled out a piece of lawn because we want to mow it. And it was like this,
Mm-hmm.
so now it's like this. Yeah, I didn't have to ask the town to do that.
Okay,
And I don't think you would here either.
fine. Then it's what I'm looking for is understanding.
Yeah, I think that whatever would trigger a permit
So,
is what we would consider. Is that accurate, Tara?
Yeah, I think that said it better as I was landing on, yeah.
Good.
so it's not development unless it's buildings and structures.
Or changing the land use. If you're changing the terrain to put in mini golf,
Absolutely.
that's development.
Okay.
Yeah.
Better understanding. Moving on.
Moving on. Any more discussion on this? Because we're gonna table this and bring it up. So we've got a little bit of homework to go over it.
November's gonna be a big one.
It is.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
Alright.
somewhere along the way, you're gonna need an extra meeting because I'm gonna be giving you the site plan regulations for that time too.
Yes.
Tara, is your intent to have a public hearing in November or decide what's being moved forward to the public hearing?
To decide what's being moved forward.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. We're gonna move on to VCC1 discussion. And James, thank you for your patience and waiting. And the reason why we wanted you here is I feel like the VC and C1 we haven't really discussed this a lot, but it seems that we have not, but we have in a way, but throughout the years, we need to discuss more about it. And so that we have a little better understanding on your conceptual plan as well. But that's kind of the thought that I had. Anybody, any other thoughts that you? Alan, I know you had something because the VC and C1, you were curious about that a couple of meetings ago.
I think my focus back then was back on parking.
Okay.
We've discussed aerial easements, so I'm anxious to hear what they have to say.
Okay, let's ask James for his comments.
Yeah, we can start there, James, if you wouldn't mind.
I mean,
Comment.
I'll come up here so people.
Sure.
can hear. I guess I'm unclear on what comments you want. I mean, you've seen, and I've presented the conceptual plan. That's still our existing conceptual plan.
Yeah,
But we haven't come forward with any specific site plans or development plans. We're working on, we've discussed several times, the permitting for the gondola. That's a very long process that is not driven by us, it's driven by the Forest Service. So I guess I'm not clear on what comments you want other than what I've talked about before.
sure. I think it's the same comments as before. I don't think people are really clear on the issue. Actually, the big issue that people are talking about is the garage parking.
Okay.
And we're just trying to get a handle on that, I believe.
No, I think that the matter to be discussed is the emphasis on commercial versus residential. That is, if the only development that's left in the town is this property that belongs to you.
Yeah.
And it's zoned commercial. And that it's, well, it's hard to imagine is that I don't know of another town, resort or otherwise that prospers and succeeds well without a commercial center. And if much of that property were developed residentially, what would happen to the commercial future of the town? And-
Well, I think what you see there is a large hotel. That's a commercial structure. There's a second hotel, that's a commercial structure. There's a conference center, that's a commercial structure. There's several buildings in there for retail, restaurants, amenities, activities. All of those are commercial structures and activities. A large portion of that entire plan is commercial.
I think we're also wondering about the, on top of the commercial, would you be considering residential, or living
Those
quarters?
mixed use buildings anticipate upper level, residential or lodging of some type,
Lodging,
not
yeah.
hotel style. There's hotels there that you can clearly see on there. But those mixed use buildings would also be some sort of, lodging or residential component, the exact details of which have not been determined yet.
Yep.
But I think that's what you would see in any kind of resort centric development, all that mixture of different types of available housing stock, whether it's transitory like a hotel or timeshare or rental condos or owner occupied housing. I mean, there's all that mix that goes into any community that's essentially resort based, so.
And there are other sections of that property that have been allocated for additional condominium construction?
No.
No.
You mean like Green Peak?
Like Green Peak, yes.
No. Not at this time, no.
Good. Okay, that makes good sense. And so it really, what happens to C1 is dependent upon the Forest Service approving the gondola.
To some degree, yeah, that's obviously a key component of that plan is the siting and establishment of that gondola. If that were actually to be not permitted, then we'd have to go back to that plan and say, okay, that changes how we orient things around here, right? The gondola is sited near Town Square for a reason. The gondola is sited next to a large hotel for a reason. If that gondola is not permitted, then that changes the whole thought process around what goes into that plan.
Yes.
That's certainly not our preference.
No.
And we certainly
Nobody's
expect it to be approved.
Yeah.
But it's a long process. We've been at it for 3 years. Well, I mean, we started pre-pandemic. It slowed down a little bit during the pandemic, but it's been 3 solid years since the pandemic, and we're looking at multiple years from now before a permit is issued. Again, that's not our timeline, that's the Forest Service's timeline. I would like them to move faster, I think.
They should.
Yeah.
I know the town has, is working with the Forest Service on things. We'd all like them to move faster on things, but they work with companies.
I hear you. No, it's,
Any other thoughts, any other questions?
Do you have an idea how many new people you'd bring into the valley if this is developed as you see it?
New as in
Well, you
permanent
ju-
residents, as in visitors, as
Well, you
in,
just said owner occupied condos and things like that. You also have,
well, it's hard to, it's hard to determine that when you build residential for sale, you don't control whether someone's gonna be a year-round occupant or not. You don't make that determination when you're selling them the building. I don't think you can add that stipulation to
But
something
there's-
that you're not gonna sell it to them if they're not gonna occupy it. So, I mean, what's I don't even know what the percentage of, we've built 21 units at Green Peak. They're just about finished. They're all spoken for. I don't even know the mix of the owner occupied versus
Yeah, but
vacation
my
homes, so
question,
I don't know.
I guess my question was poorly phrased. How many units are you building, do you think, that would be, people would purchase to live in at, you know?
I don't know what percentage, that is an impossible thing to predict this far out as to what the market might look like, what the what visitation might look like, and how you might determine, you know, can you tell me exactly the size of the hotel you're gonna approve when I bring a plan to build a hotel, and how many rooms it's gonna have?
That's my next question.
Well, I'm gonna propose a hotel with maybe 350 rooms. Are you gonna, but that might require a height variance. Are you gonna tell me today whether you're gonna agree to that or not?
I don't have to do that, do I?
No, so I'm saying that all those things go into determining what the other pieces of the plan end up looking like. It's a multifaceted plan. I can't give a number on one aspect of it without knowing how the other parts of it might play out.
Okay, fair enough. Can you describe or discuss how this conceptual plan will affect the ambiance, the town as it exists now?
Well, one of our goals is to bring more activity to the center of town, is to create a greater hub of activity. That's one reason why we have hotels with hundreds of rooms there, because hotel guests don't just, you rent a condominium, you tend to stay in the condominium. You cook your dinner there, you have your meal there, you spend your evening there. Hotel guests like to get out and about. So bringing that level of activity of guests to the center of town to create more activity, to create more opportunities for retail and restaurants and other activities in the center of town is all part of that. That's one reason why we've, we've envisioned the idea, and I obviously would have to take action from the town of cutting off Village Road there, is to create a more pedestrian-friendly, dense, walkable area that isn't cut off by a road and separated into sort of different pods, is to create a more seamless, active area that is all pedestrian in the middle of town, where people are coming out, walking around, having dinner, walking around afterwards in the winter there. We have the seasonal ice rink so people can be skating while they're having hot chocolate outside. That's all part of bringing more activity to the center of town. And the gondola is a big part of that as well. Our one part of that would to bring more people from the mountain down into town to spend time and spend money and be guests here, versus just hopping in their car at the mountain and driving down the road and turning right.
And this is all wonderful if you're a business owner. How is it going to affect me as a homeowner? We have
Well,
several.
I can jump in. So Alan, I think your question is perfect, because I know we've heard a lot about this throughout the community, and we have a lot of homeowners. The original development of Waterville Valley was concentric circles. We all know that. Like the core of the valley was supposed to be where the activity was and where the high energy was. And we faulted in 1988 after Town Square and Golden Eagle were built. There wasn't any more building. So we built the residential out on the outside skirts of town. We're trying to finish that development so that we have a thriving community that drives not only your home value, not only my home value, but also the guest experience. And that guest experience being in town and having something lively to do will rejuvenate a lot of what's happening for all of our entities in town. Now, when it comes to the ambiance of the town being the end of the road, originally this resort was built down right next to my house. My house was the original core of the town. When we developed town core and moved it down into the village, that energy started to move away from it. You can still feel that energy on the north side of town because of BBTS, because of the chairlift, because of that. The energy is now being into the core of the town. We're bringing more energy back to that town. We need to somehow come to the realization that this isn't always going to be a sleepy little town. It needs to grow, otherwise it will decline. And we saw that throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. So we're either going up or we're going down. It's always going to be changing. And there's always going to be sides that are always going to be pushing for one side or the other side. And we need to find that balance. And I believe this plan does that quite well. Because it does remove a lot of the barriers that our town experiences of having to drive a car up to the mountain. That increases our traffic, and we all have traffic problems around town. Being able to access the town from the resort and not have to drive and turn left, things like that, that'll reduce the amount of vehicles that we have on the roads, which will increase the ambiance of a slower town. So a lot of those thought processes we have put into this and trying to make it so we maintain that quiet town, because that's what, as commercially, that's what we're looking at, is what is the value of the town. Residentially, that's what we're looking at as value to the town, correct?
I disagree with you about 100%. If you're gonna put a
About.
350, if you're gonna put a 350 room hotel, you're gonna increase traffic. Everybody's gotta drive to the hotel. Okay? You're gonna increase sewerage, you're gonna increase police, you're gonna increase everything. And I don't get any benefit out of that.
Well, the entire resort in town was built for this.
That's history we're talking about now. And I understand you want the town to grow. Yeah, I think the bigger problem is how much, and this is an enormous project proportionate to the size of the rest of the town. It's gonna overwhelm it, in my opinion, and I don't think in a good way.
I believe it will, and we could disagree on that.
Right, of course.
We can talk over that, no problem. But I also think that it's important to understand that with the sewer plant that we have to put in, with all these town things that we need to do, we need to have the right sized resort community to be able to support those things you just mentioned, the police, the fire, the highway department, and the sewer. So that's what I'll leave you with. I know, James, you want to jump back in, so.
No, I just gonna say that, I'm not a full-time resident, but I'm a property owner here as well, and spend a lot of time here, and I think, again, it's a matter of opinion. I think a vibrant, pedestrian-friendly resort core with restaurants, retail activities is a plus. That's the kind of place I would like to be, whether I was a full-time resident or a part-time resident. So again, it's a matter of opinion about whether you think that's a benefit or not. If people want the town to stay the way it is, that's certainly their right to feel that way. But as Tim said, this was always contemplated for the commercial center of town in one form or another. I'll go back to the, mentioned parking earlier on. Parking garages have been contemplated in the center of town for 40 years. They were part of the original thinking. They were part of all the existing parking agreements that were established, decades ago with the Black Bear, with the Snowy Owl, with Town Square, with the town of Waterville Valley itself, with the ice arena. All of them contemplate a future where parking garages may be implemented to add structured parking to allow for more dense development of the property in the center of town. So all of these things have been contemplated, and we are trying to craft a vision that creates a vibrant town core. Yes, we're a business. It's commercial land. That land is intended for businesses to develop with business activity. And so we contemplate a future where we have a more active, vibrant town core. Yes, where we have more guests coming into town to stay and visit and recreate. What we want to do is build a town core where people come in. Yeah, they drive in along Valley Road and they park their car, and then they don't have to access their car until they leave. We want them to be able to be in their hotel and walk out the door, go to activities in the center of town, walk over to the gondola to go up to the mountain, not drive their car up to the mountain. That's the core of that vision there, and why we have thought things through the way you see them on that conceptual plan.
Yeah.
Just from a town facility standpoint, that plan has been taken into account in the sizing and construction of the new plant. Where we are looking at commercial development for the most part. Yes, there is some residential development that's part of that, but the development of commercial property is really important going forward for the town from my perspective. The tax base right now is 96% residential, 4% commercial. That puts a lot of pressure on you as residents to pay the majority of the cost of the infrastructure. If you get that, if you look back to the 1980s, when the Golden Eagle was first built, when Town Square was first built, that split between the residential and commercial property was about 75-25, 80-20. And you know, Steve Hamilton talked to you about why that has continued to shift, because we haven't added any commercial development in town. It's been strictly residential. And the services demand that would come from that sort of development, until we know what the development is, I don't know if it's gonna be an extra police officer or two or however many, right? I don't know what the impact is on trash or public works or whatever. Those are questions that we ask during the site plan review, and we think about those things at that time something gets proposed. But I can tell you, the real long-term infrastructure, the wastewater treatment plant in particular, has already been sized to do this.
Yeah, there's no question.
And so there's no real huge increase in the cost of services from that standpoint. But that would certainly help in paying for that treatment plant than just having it a bunch of single-family homes or condos. So we are talking with Tyrell all the time about the impact on infrastructure.
I agree with what you're saying, except for one thing. Town Square is appraised at $10 million. They're only paying taxes on 2.5 million because of depreciation.
Right.
The same thing's gonna happen with the hotel. It's gonna start off paying a lot of money and it's gonna decrease dramatically.
But if you bring the additional development, the additional activity into town through additional commercial development, then a place like Town Square gets improved and the depreciation changes. The total valuation of it changes. Yes, the depreciation does happen, but that's been our problem. We haven't added any additional or serious upgrades to our commercial properties in town for 30 years
But that,
or more.
I don't see that as the problem, because residential has continued to
But
increase
there
in
is no
value.
more residential land. There are maybe 8 or 9 residential lots left in town.
Mhm.
So unless somebody comes in and buys all of Windsor Hill and completely redevelops the condominiums, you're not going to have new residential. Yes, if we had hundreds of acres of vacant land where residences could be built, that might be true, but we don't have any land left. And in fact, I think that's what started this conversation was there are aspects of the village commercial and C1 zones that allow residential use. And part of this discussion when we started it was, do we want to tighten those up so that it's residential over commercial rather than, or multi-unit dwellings only, or something like that? That's what we first talked about.
That was
right?
precisely the concern
Yeah,
that,
and so to hear James say that, you know, they're moving forward with the gondola and that commercial development is the majority of the development here seems to be tracking with what we initially talked about.
yes, because
right? To
we have
what
this,
Bill had asked.
they have this zone here, it's zoned commercial.
Yeah.
It's not zone residential or anything else, it's
Right.
zoned commercial.
Yeah.
And then if at least, okay, I'll express my opinion. My opinion is that unless the center of the town is developed commercially and in a healthy manner,
Yeah.
the town will decline.
Right.
There are no examples of any towns that I can find anywhere that did not prosper and succeed without a commercial center. If it's entirely residential, You know, why do people come here?
And I'll just add, look, yes, we're a business, but our owners, our employees, we care a lot about this town. We are very, very invested in the future of this town, both as business owners and as property owners here. My family has been coming here for decades and decades, and we, will continue to do so. So this isn't just about making money. If I wanted to make money, I would have proposed Green Peak phases 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6,
Exactly.
and I would have made a lot of money over the next 2 years. Instead of waiting what's going to be years before we realize the benefits of this development. So, I'm not doing that because I don't think it would be good for the town in the long term. I don't think anyone here wants to see 30 or 40 more of those buildings built in the center of town. But we could do that today, but I don't want to do that. I don't think that's a good long-term outcome. So it's not just about, I've got this land and I want to make some money. It's about what we feel like is, achieving the vision of this town as a resort community, a resort and residential community that has a vibrant center in it, and is a great destination. I mean, this town is a resort destination. It's a resort community. I mean, it's not a retirement community in the villages in Florida. That's not what this is. It's a resort community. And that involves having a vibrant resort and a healthy town center that is both for the benefit of our guests and the benefit of the folks who live here. And that's our
Yes.
goal.
Do you know the percent occupancy or use of the Golden Eagle and the Black Bear?
Not off the top of my head, but we track those
You
data. Well, I mean, we know the occupancy of the units that get rented.
Yeah.
I don't know the occupancy of units that people own and
I'm-
whether they live in them. That's.
I'm
I
trying to
don't own that
find out,
property.
I'm trying to find out if your hotel's gonna bastardize the use of the Golden Eagle and the Black Bear by taking away some of their business.
Our goal is to expand the number of guests who come here, not have it stay flat. And a hotel guest is looking for something different than someone who's renting a condominium in a building like that. We have guests who rent hotel rooms far from here because they don't want to rent a condominium. They want to stay in a hotel. They're renting hotel rooms in Lincoln and driving here every day to visit the resort. We want those people to be staying here in town and enjoying all the things that we can offer as a resort and as a community here in town.
Yeah, the two controversies that I was trying to address is one of the people who had raised complaints that there was too much residential development in what was C1. I think you've answered the question. I think you've stated your intention and said not going to build any more of these green peaks. As attractive and profitable as they are, that's not the plan. And the other concern that I've heard is the parking garage, although it's a controversial subject, that, the concept that you've developed here is not going to work unless the gondola is approved. Once the gondola is approved, then there's an easy way to go from town up to the mountain. But once those people drive into town, that it starts to increase the energy in the center of the town. If they can be provided a convenient place to park when they arrive. So people have then thinking, oh, what's this place? What is this parking garage going to
The
look like?
intention of the parking is not for the day guest who's coming to the mountain. The intention is for that guest to still use drive up, take a left at the road and drive up to the mountain. The intention of the parking here is to meet the needs of the development that you see on that plan. Though that's built around the parking requirements ratios in your zoning ordinance to provide enough parking for the hotels, for the conference center, for the commercial, for the residential, all those things that are in there. And I know there was a comment earlier about, below grade parking. There's below grade parking all over that plan. There's below grade parking under those garages. There's below grade parking under all those buildings. But that's how much parking is required for the zoning ordinance for all of those activities. That conceptual was designed with those rules in mind. And so, that's the parking that is needed, but that is intended for the people who are coming to town square, people who are coming to the hotels, people who are coming to the commercial activities in town. The day skier is still gonna go up the road to the mountain and access through the new base area. The parking lots become ski in, ski out, so they become much more convenient because of the terrain expansion with the gondola. So it's not for someone to just come in and leave their car and take the gondola up and then leave for the day. That's for the folks who are in the center of town for their stay.
Okay, understood.
So you could have remote parking and shuttle people to your hotel?
Remote parking
I'm just,
where?
I don't know that answer, but
I guess theoretically, sure, any hotel could do that. Would I build that into that plan? No, I don't expect I would.
Right?
Satisfied.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay.
James.
Thank
Good.
you.
Okay,
James, thank you very much for your time and explaining a few things for
in
us.
Aspen 2021, in Aspen 2021, they had a moratorium on all development. And all prices went up.
I'll hear more about this later.
Yeah, so if
Fun.
anyone has anything else on the VCBC one,
I think
Rob, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
No, that's okay. No.
You got it, okay. Daryl, anything from you? Any thoughts?
Nope, good here, John. Just good, happy to listen. Good information.
Okay. All right. And Tara, you're okay? Any other thoughts?
I wasn't really participating in that part of your agenda, but I was surprised that nobody brought up the question that you were discussing that led to inviting him, which was about whether it would be a deal breaker if you stopped allowing residential on the ground floor. That's what we were talking about when you decided to invite him.
No,
I hear you.
okay, I addressed that.
I think he did answer some of that.
And what
Okay.
I heard the answer was that it was the residential is principally focused on upstairs that is above the ground floor, and that the ground floor is commercial.
That's the general idea, yes. And I can't give a specific answer without we don't have a plan to present you on any particular aspect of this, but I'll say what I've said before when I've been asked the question. There's nothing that's a deal breaker as far as anything goes, but like any property owner, I'm gonna say the more flexibility we have, the better it's gonna be, and the better the prospects are for successful development. I think any property owner would tell you the same thing. The more the restrictions narrow the options, the less the options become for attracting development partners who may want to join us in building out that plan.
Okay, but what I'm trying to indicate is this is you might say a cooperative arrangement that is. I don't think the board is attempting to say there will be no residential on the ground floor. And if we did that, what would your reaction be?
If you pass that change to the zoning ordinance, I would say that reduces flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I heard your answer, and it is.
But like,
No,
it's not I'll use the phrase Tara used, it's not a deal breaker. If you ban commercial development in C1, yeah, that's a deal breaker. No, it's not a deal breaker. It reduces flexibility, and we would have to work within
Okay.
those parameters.
Right, but I heard your preference, and I heard where you would like to go. And I don't know whether we push it further than that.
Well, that's up to you as a board. I'm just giving you my take on it.
That's a conversation you had last year. And you kept it on the agenda and wanted to keep considering it, and so you invited him to come back and talk some more about it. And the possibilities that you were talking about weren't necessarily no residential units on the ground floor, but maybe a percentage, or maybe not, within. One of the examples we talked about was so many feet of the front of the building, so that for the pedestrian, they see the commercial uses. There were a range of things that you were talking about, and you've talked about for over a year. And that was the conversation that led to, well, let's talk with the landowner. But I didn't hear you talk through any of those possibilities.
I think that we were just trying to get Jane's perspective on the conceptual, so we could better understand how to go forward on our end, because I don't think we've discussed the BC and C1 enough. We've spoke about it, but not really. I don't know if there's enough understanding with the book within the board to understand it. Very.
Well, I think it's quite conceivable that the board could say that the percentage of residential on the ground floor in the development in C1 could be X. In other words, to provide some limitation. But generally, the interest of feedback that I've heard on this is they just didn't want to see more green peak.
Right,
and
we got
I think,
that answer today. So
and
that's
I think
fine.
it was answered, but okay, we could come up with a numerical definition of C1, or at least residential, on ground floor in C1. No?
And
Right, and you're
a
speaking with one current landowner, but your zoning allows Green Peak.
I understand.
So
I'm talking now as my individual preference would be to limit or stop additional green peaks and say that there is the possibility of mixed development in C1, and that the amount of residential on the ground floor could be X. And that would probably be satisfactory to those opponents of what has already been developed.
Given what we have in front of us with the conceptual plan, I don't think anybody would want to live on the first floor either. So
Yeah.
it makes it less,
I agree with that.
less likely that it would be built.
But it's going to be done in cooperation with the landowner.
I mean, to me, the whole concept here is if you build it, they will come.
Mm-hmm.
We have Town Square, they haven't come to that, so now we're gonna upgrade Town Square and hope they come to that,
I mean, people come,
but not enough. There's empty spaces.
yeah, but there isn't any place.
I think the development would be a game changer if it can go through fully.
Yeah.
Especially with the gondola.
Right, I think you would attract a younger population. People love to come and walk with their kids and, park the car and just take the stroller and go. And I think that's a positive. I think about this weekend. This weekend we have a lot going on. We have the Sportoma tent sale, all the stuff for BBTS and the fall foliage. That is public and private, right? We've got the rec doing a lot of things, and we've got the private companies doing their things. And we expect a lot of people given the foliage, right? And I think a lot of people are excited for the buzz in a shoulder season. So I think there's good and bad with it, right? We live here because in this time of year we can walk out and it feels like we're the only people here. And that's a huge benefit for us as residents. However, when Jugtown closes at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they can't find anybody, that's a problem. So if we can bring more people to live here and work here and just generally be here, yes, our town is going to grow and it's going to be much bigger than we originally intended, but it will make the town better in the long run because we'll have more people.
And do you
Yeah,
think
we'll
people are
survive.
gonna come midweek?
I think people will live here. But again, that's just my personal opinion. I don't actually
I'm
know.
sorry, say that again?
I think people will live here. I don't think that, I think you will have more people come daily, but I think people will want to live here because there are things to do. There are a lot of people who don't want to live in the middle of the woods with nothing to do. Hence why cities are more populous than rural areas.
I'm not sure that's a cause and effect.
I mean, right, you've got public transportation, and that's huge for young and old. And then you have businesses, a variety of businesses, you know, a lot of people go to the Coyote or to, like, a lot of people are really excited about the Indian restaurant because it's something different. There is a lot of positive to it, but I understand where you're coming from. It's not the town that we live in now. This will be a dramatic difference. But we have control over the ordinances and the zoning and what we allow and what we don't allow. But we don't have control over what people necessarily build. We have a framework and people can bounce around and build what they want in that framework, but we can't tell them what to do once they're inside the frame.
And as a theoretic possible retirement community, what's missing here is medical services.
Yeah, if there's a
But
retail
there's-
space on the bottom floor, you could absolutely talk to Jeff Dropkin. He's been trying to do it for years.
Hopefully he'll succeed. But that's what.
He's
we're
nearing
people
retirement.
So if the whole intent of all of this again is to continue to discuss this. So that when it does come forward to making decisions, just in this, not in just this room, but in town decisions. If it has to go, things have to go to a vote. I've seen it time and time again, it comes to the 11th hour and people don't, what do you mean? What are we voting on?
Mhm.
So if we continue to discuss these issues, we'll be more educated and up on this, so when the time comes, we'll know what we're doing, we'll know what to say. And that was the reason just to bring James in just for this 1 hour that he's been here, and then we can discuss things amongst ourselves in the future meetings.
2 hours.
That's the whole
And I
idea.
just, one of the things you said strikes a good chord is walking around a green area, et cetera. It's, you know, in
Yeah.
town square. The most pushback I hear is from the parking garages,
Yeah.
which is why I threw out have remote parking. There, there are towns in Europe, and I'm sure James knows, they have no cars in town. They shuttle people in.
I mean,
You asked where you could build a garage, you've got lot 9, lot 10, and then shuttle people down to your hotel. Just, I know it's not practical, I know it's not what you want to do, but it's there.
Isn't that part of the
But
Forest
the-
Service?
and the re-
Part of the Forest Service.
And the
So you
reason,
have to go through years of permits and all that stuff with the Forest Service.
I don't even know if they would allow the
Yeah.
land to be used to shuttle people to and off
I don't
service property.
ought to put a building up for.
Yeah.
I
mean,
think we should all have golf carts. Everybody parks their car somewhere else, and then you just have a golf cart, tool around. It'll be
and I'm
great.
surprised there's no workforce housing out of you.
No, we didn't bring
surprised.
up workforce housing.
Yeah.
It's not, no.
That would be
the-
separate from those.
I'll go back to what Tara said. And she said, no, if we decide that there's going to be a limit on the residential building, a residential property construction on ground floor, then we have to devise a zoning amendment. We have to add that to the list of zoning amendments that we're working on now, these environmental ones.
Mhm.
But if it's going to be done, then we have to move forward on it. Isn't that what, Tara, were you addressing that particular problem?
Yeah, I thought last month you decided that this year you were only gonna move forward on 4 amendments. But
Well, 3 of them are these.
But
environmental-
be discussing that for possibly next year. That's what I
Okay.
thought you were doing, is starting the conversation to possibly do that next year.
But that's the procedure, that's the result is a change and an amendment.
Right, and that's where it got stalled. We were talking about different options, like a percentage or not near the front of the building, and and the conversation was, well, let's ask the landowner if that would be a deal breaker. Or what limit might be acceptable.
Mhm.
So the landowner said, no, it's not a deal breaker. And what we need to do is decide what's reasonable.
But I didn't hear the landowner say what might be acceptable.
Any comment, landowner?
Yeah, I think
It's
Frankly,
putting him in an unfair.
No, I don't have a comment on that.
Yeah.
It's your job to contemplate the zoning changes you want to make, and it's my job as a property owner to give you my feedback on that. I'm not gonna come here and make proposals to you about how to
Right.
restrict development on my property.
Yeah,
If
no,
you
no,
want
no,
my
not asking
proposal,
that.
it's do nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but you know,
No.
that's not my, it's not my role. It's not my job, is to propose where I think you should limit my
Development.
the rights that already exist on the property I own.
Right.
Okay.
James, I'm sorry, is there parking for residents to access town square? And this,
Yeah, there's shared parking for town square.
and it's free?
Yeah.
there's like.
And just one last thing, you're proposing a 39-room hotel opposite the
Boutique.
no, an apartment building. Across from the convention center.
We're thinking about it,
conference
but
center.
we don't have a proposal in front of you yet, no.
Okay. I just wondered if there was development or parking. I'm trying to get your garages out of town square. And if you could put them where you're proposing or adjacent to this possible apartment building.
Right, the conference center parking lot?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a possibility, sure.
I'm sure Village wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
You're gonna have other people, yes, you're gonna have objections.
No matter where you put
Garages,
it.
no matter where you put them, so.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
in my opinion, a lot of the town is against the parking in town square. And I think what you're saying is developing it as green space would be a beautiful addition. As opposed to 2 large parking garages. If you
Yes,
could
but
do
it's commercial land, it's not really intended to be green space, you have zoning for green space. It's commercial property intended for commercial development.
I'm not saying you don't have the right to do it. I'm saying,
No,
This is the
I'm
thought.
not talking about the right, I'm talking about the intention as was contemplated for decades here, as is contemplated in your zoning ordinance. Which explicitly, you know, discusses parking structures in C1. All these things have been contemplated, this isn't some new idea I've pulled out of thin air to throw on the table. The Waterville Company had half a dozen different development plans for this property over the years, all of which filled every square inch, sometimes with 300 condominiums and not a lick of commercial development. So there's been lots of proposals I shouldn't say proposals, ideas over the year of developing out this. So this isn't something new and out of the blue.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because they're much more open about it than the previous owners. You know, Waterville Company wasn't necessarily coming and giving us their ideas, and they're looking for feedback, which we're giving, right? And I mean, I think that's the whole point of this process.
but the Waterville company was self-dealing. They could do whatever they wanted and they did do whatever they wanted. He doesn't have that option.
Right, so
So he's got to come here and at
What's
least
the better
convince
option?
us.
Well, the
I
Waterville
think
Company
that-
was still subject to the planning board and the zoning ordinances and everything else.
Yes.
Absolutely right, but they controlled everything.
Not for the last 20 years, they've been coming into the planning board.
And
I've
what
owned this
but
property
they haven't
for
done
5
anything
years.
for the last 20 years.
You know,
Well, they've done a lot. They did all of Moose Run, they did all of Cascade Ridge since I've been here.
But they haven't done anything in town square.
Oh, okay, yeah, in the C1 zone, they proposed what he just said, they proposed Green Peak times 10. That was a plan that the planning
Right.
board looked at.
Which would
and
have
said,
demolished,
Please no,
would have,
and the Waterville Company backed off of it. But that was a submitted plan,
and there'd be no commercial development.
there'd be no commercial development in the C1 zone,
and we definitely need more commercial properties
yeah.
that we all
The
agree on.
Town's gonna grow and prosper, commercial is needed. Okay, all of that's understood.
Yeah.
What James said was that if the planning board decides to restrict residential development on the ground floor of buildings constructed in the new C1 plan, that it's not a game breaker.
Right.
And that just for the satisfaction of those who are opposed largely to whatever you've suggested, that could be helpful in that a change in the ordinance with regard to the ground level construction on C1 could bring about satisfactory results. It could get positive votes at town meeting. Yeah, I
Not my
understand.
place to say.
I'm not asking you to.
I think you answered this earlier, but will this go forward without a gondola?
If a gondola didn't get approved by the Forest Service, this would change. Yeah, we'd have to rethink because like I said, a lot of that is planned around, gondola and gondola access. We want people to be walking to the gondola from the hotels and from the other properties in the center of town. If that changes, yes, that changes the plan, yes.
I think you answered your own question.
Without-
Without the gondola, it won't work.
The current plan.
It changes.
It changes.
Change.
Well, what's the purpose of it? Okay, never mind.
So,
I think the gondola is critically important.
so wait, to reel this all back in, okay? One of our main things to have James here was the residential C1 discussion.
Yes.
I think we've got as much out of you as we're gonna do this today. Thank you so much for coming in.
And if you, like you said, you asked the question about a potential specific proposal, sure, you come back with another potential specific proposal, I'll give you my feedback on that,
Sure.
but I'm not gonna off the top of my head say,
No.
oh, here's where first of all, I can't draw a line in the sand, it doesn't.
We're not asking for that.
I know,
Yeah.
but there have been comments made that I say something and the planning board doesn't do it. Because, that came up before when I expressed my opinion about whether, restricting certain things in C1. It's like, oh, the planning board rolls over because the property owner says he doesn't want that done. I give you my opinion.
Right.
You have your job to do and I have my job to do as the property owner.
Sure.
Right. I think no matter what we do as a board or you do, we're always gonna get criticized about it, so.
I agree. I mean,
That's
The nature of the beast.
I obviously know that not everything that we are talking about doing there is gonna make everyone happy. That's not
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So.
So we gotta move
Best
on.
I can do is explain what we're doing, why we're doing it,
Yeah.
and work within the rules that we have.
Yeah, and that's what my plan is here, is to let everybody know, not just in this room, but out there. We have a website that people can go on and look at this, and then you can come in here and talk to us about it, but they don't. So we're just gonna move on. You are, we are, and look for the future. But I think we're getting out of what we really want to discuss here, so I think.
No, I think we made progress.
Yeah, I do too.
And I also think we have a continuing cooperative arrangement.
Yep, so if anyone wants to agree on this or not agree on this, to bring up VC and C1 again without James, I'm saying as a board to discuss it. I think it should be continued. We have Tara that's really on board about this to help us guide us through this. So what I'm gonna suggest right now is we stop right here with this and move on.
Yeah.
Okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you for coming, Jane.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you, James.
We already sort of did the committee reports, right?
Yep,
No correspondence?
we're pretty much down to a
No
calendar
correspondence.
review, I think.
No correspondence.
But-
Calendar.
No correspondence.
Yeah. And calendar review will be November, the next meeting,
14th.
14.
And we might have to add a meeting, I think, is based on what's in front of us, and we all have to have public hearings, but
Yeah.
I don't think we have anything to schedule right now.
But charities, would probably be wise for us to schedule another meeting in December sometime for a public hearing discussion.
I think you might need another meeting in November or December to just focus on the site plan regulations.
Okay,
That's a big deal.
yeah.
Well, then you're running up against Thanksgiving, so if you do the very next week, if
Yeah,
everybody keeps that in their
21st.
mind, yeah.
The 21st.
Why don't you pencil in the 21st, because that's pre-Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, for the site plan regs.
And you can change that at your 14th meeting, depending on.
Yeah,
Those are Thursdays?
Those would be Thursdays.
8 AM.
Right, potential.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all right, let's do that.
I can definitely get the changes in your hand for the 14th so that
Okay,
you'll see what you have to do and
that would be great. Anything else?
Sir,
Anyone want to make a motion?
motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Faster than a
Charles.
speeding bullet.
Those maps are not very detailed. I'll work on trying to. Cause I have not. Oh, sorry. I'll try to work with Tara